Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by StackHawk. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation and demo ahead, but before we dive into things, I have just a couple of notes to cover with you. First of all, we are recording today's session. So if you'd like to rewatch, if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an email shortly after we conclude. And that email will have a copy of our recording for you. So just hold tight for that. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first option is on the right side of your screen is the chat tab. So whenever you find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you're joining. I see Colorado, Spain, Boston, LA, whether that's Louisiana or Los Angeles. It could be either. Let us know there in the chat. If you have any specific questions, we'd like you to go ahead and send those into the Q&A tab. Sending your questions to that Q&A just helps us keep track, and we'd like to answer as many of your questions today as we can. Additionally, we have a couple of polls that we'll be launching throughout our program today, so keep an eye out as those pop up. And there are a couple of resources in the handout section if you'd like to jump over and download those before we get started. Finally, before we close things out today, I will be giving away two $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around until the very end to see if you're one of our lucky winners. So today we're going to discuss how to shift left the right way. And I'm joined today by Scott Gerlach, CSO and co-founder of StackHawk, and Jim Armstrong, Senior Director of Product at Snyk. Scott and Jim, thank you so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. Scott, do you want to dive in for us?
Absolutely. Thanks, Cody. Appreciate the bumper on our way in and all the ground rules and all that stuff. One thing I'll add is we like, Jim and I like to make these things kind of collaborative and interactive. So if you have a question about what we're talking about or anything that we are talking about, please jump it into the Q&A or in the chat. We'll try to get to it as we're talking through these slides. Love having some of those questions and interaction happen throughout the slide deck. So today we're talking about shifting left the right way. I've got my good friend Jim here. Quick intros. Everyone's Unix shell now has who am we instead of who am I, because everyone's logged in all the time. I'm Scott Gerlach, as Cody mentioned, CSO co-founder StackHawk. I was the CISO at SendGrid for about 3 years. I worked at GoDaddy for almost 10 years, which seems like a lifetime. I'm also a husband, dad, golfer, brewer, breaker of things around the house. If you want to get a hold of me, you can find my Twitter handle here and my LinkedIn LinkedIn URL. These are also at the end, so we can catch them later. Jim, tell the people who you are.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. So I lead the product marketing organization here at Snyk. I've been at Snyk for about 4 years now, so about half of Snyk's life. Before Snyk, I was at Docker. Before Docker, I was at VMware and McAfee before that. So I've had a lot of fun kind of going full circle. I learned in college, I was computer science. So I thought I was going to be a programmer at some point in my life. And, life has a funny way of turning out. So here we are full circle talking about developers, but not a professional developer today. I am also a husband and a dad. I am not a brewer, but I do like to consume brews. So happy to join up with Scott on that.
Synergy.
Exactly. And would love for folks, if you have questions after or want to reach out, my Twitter handle and LinkedIn are there as well. Good to be here.
Awesome. So today we're obviously talking about shifting left, and if you know anything about shifting left, it's kind of a journey. It's the idea of shifting some of those security tools that we use to check applications and infrastructure and any other thing that developers are working on into the hands of developers, making that work easier, faster, etc. So we'll talk a bunch about that. But the very first question I have for everyone today is, what's easier? What's the harder problem? Well, okay, not what's easier. What's the harder problem in application security? I know the poll message is backwards. So remember, the poll question says, what's easier, finding or fixing? This slide says, what's harder? So you pick what's easier in the poll, and we'll figure that out and go through that. Jim, when you talk to prospects and customers, what do you end up with on this kind of poll, the split wise?
Yeah, I think both of them are, have their challenges, right? I think the quality of the findings is a question a lot of people have, but, clearly we're talking about shifting left. I think there's a reason why people are trying to shift left. And it's a belief that somebody needs to do one of these two things that isn't getting done often enough. Hint, hint. And so I think clearly the harder problem is the fixing side of it, right? I think we can find lots of things, whether we're always finding the right things or not. Maybe there's a question there, but I think it's the fixing side that I think we see by and large as the
yeah. I agree with you. I think it's kind of interesting when we talk about when we talk about security, just generally as security professionals, we often talk about like asset discovery. So that would probably make and our poll question is kind of ending up in the 50-50 realm here. Actually, almost, there we go. 10-8. All right. Now that's working out to what we want to talk about. No, I'm kidding. So we're talking about asset discovery and like, what things do I have so that I can test them? But once you figure out what things you can test, almost all the time it turns into, how do I get these problems fixed? Because of how organizations are set up, how security teams and engineering teams are set up, and a lot of stuff. And most of the time, we're still at almost 50-50. We've got like 43-39 fixing, finding, and then almost 20% of us are not sure which one's harder.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah.
So I think for today's purpose, what we're talking about is the problem with fixing. The problem with fixing, and maybe a little bit with finding, is we always keep the last person to know as the person who needs to know the most, right? So the development team who's building applications and creating infrastructure with Terraform and all that stuff, they're always somehow the last person to know, and that makes both finding and fixing pretty hard. And so that's what we're here talking about. We, our poll did not turn out this way. Well, I'm glad that it didn't turn out this way.
Yeah, we may have. It may be our fault, right? Like our slide and our poll said different things. So maybe
oops,
get confused. But it does point, like, there's a question that came up in the Q&A already too. Like, what is meant by shifting left the right way? So this is sort of to your point. Like, fixing is we think harder because I think a lot of people assume the first sort of inkling is, if I shift left, if I just put tools into the developer's workflow or put it somewhere earlier in the life cycle of the app, then things will get fixed. But that's really not the case, right? There's more to it than that. You have to do more than just start lighting things up earlier and shifting tools into a developer's world to make it actually get fixed, right? To make it actually go away.
Yeah, I think so. To Jim's point here, some of the things that when we talk about shift left, we're not just, often we think about that as like, how do I put tools, whichever left is on your screen, how do I put tools further left without thinking about the other things that we're going to talk about in the presentation? So, hey, look at that. But generally, fixing is hard because you kind of have this going on, right? You've got the wrong people finding issues at the wrong time in kind of the wrong context. And that's often because of things like competing priorities, lack of ownership, like who owns this thing, who owns fixing security problems, who owns fixing application bugs, who owns vulnerabilities as a whole. And then maybe one of the worst things here, the people that usually do the finding are not the ones that do the fixing. So those jobs aren't combined, and that makes it really interrupt driven. And then sometimes we turn to our savior, the SLA. And at best, it usually acts as like, oh, sweet, I don't have to do this now. I've got 2 weeks, or I've got a month, or I got 30 days, or I can do an exception and I never have to do it. But somehow in this process of shifting left and making all of this happen, while we're handing over this security responsibility to developers and giving them kind of more work to do, but hopefully more efficient work to do, we still need to enable the security team to trust and verify what's happening here.
Yeah, I think that the context point's really critical. Like if you think through the folks involved here, even just simplifying it, developers and security involved, right? They have a different lens on the world, really, right? Like security probably sees most of the apps. They see all of the issues. They see SAST issues and DAST issues and SCA issues and lists of things like that, right? But they may not have a clear picture of an app or even what a developer is doing and what their responsibility is within an app, right? On the other hand, you have the developer who knows, and for some apps, the developer may only know a small sliver of that app, the piece that they're responsible for, but they certainly aren't aware of everything else that's going on at the company that might be deployed in the cloud, sort of adjacent to their sliver of an app. So you have these two different perspectives on it, and there's not a real great common language. Like the severity of vulnerability doesn't explain to either team why anything's important or how it fits into the big picture, or even what the big picture is. So the context is hard to figure out too.
Yeah, awesome. So speaking of context, Jim, why don't you take them through some of the things that are changing in software development that have made this problem maybe even worse today?
Yeah, for sure. I think, the nature of software development clearly has changed, right? From, 10 or so years ago, where everything was sort of waterfall monoliths, and you could do an audit. Like if you're going to release once a year, you do an audit, 6 months in, 9 months in, and you come up with all the issues, you review all the issues, you go fix all the issues, and you have plenty of time before you do the release. That's clearly not the way software is developed today, right? We have not just more software being developed faster. These development teams are independent. They're all distributed. They're doing their own thing. This whole world of agile development kind of lines up with DevOps processes. So these teams are sort of empowered to do what they want to some degree. And so that makes the role of security much, much harder, right? To figure out what are they doing and how do I get some visibility into that. We're also pushing development faster now with things like AI. So now there's even more code coming from who knows what sources, right? Like we know AI is in some cases decent at producing code, but is it really secure code? And especially within the context of all these other things that go on within an app. Lots of those things are really hard to figure out. And then the nature of everything else that goes along with it. When it was 10 years ago and you put it on a server, even a virtual server, right? You could do the audits of the servers and figure out if those servers were set up in the network and figure out if the network was correct. But now everything's in software. All that stuff is defined in a few lines of code and can change and be redeployed in a couple of seconds. And we have serverless and all kinds of other fun things. So this whole world, as we talk about shifting left, we're shifting a lot of things left, right? Infrastructure is shifted left, and part of the code, and how we get things tested and it goes through pipelines is defined in code and all of that. So it's made application security, I think, especially hard because all of those things have to be reviewed and analyzed and made sure that they're secure as well. So it puts an even greater emphasis on that. It's the whole point of sort of trying to shift the security responsibility left too, I think.
Yeah, excellent point. And hopefully that's why everyone's here is like, okay, I'm on a journey, or I'd like to be on a journey of shifting left, shifting application security left. So hopefully that's why you're here. So let's talk about a little bit about the benefits of shifting left. And I think there's a question about sharing examples or case studies of organizations that have successfully implemented shift left approach, tangible benefits they've realized in terms of software quality, release speed, and customer satisfaction. I believe both of our companies, Snyk and StackHawk, have those case studies published on the website. So feel free, snyk.io and stackhawk.com. You can get to the case studies for both of those cohorts of customers. There's really good ones on there about people going fast, but let's talk about exactly what those people have experienced and what usually happens in shift left AppSec benefits. So mostly we categorize all of this stuff as proactive prevention, right? So we spend more efficient time in operating our security teams, responding to threats and doing threat hunting instead of trying to do finding of vulnerabilities and then begging and pleading for people to work on tickets to get those vulnerabilities fixed. And if we do it in the right way, we get dev teams more engaged with application security bugs, before they can become vulnerabilities. And then we kind of make champions out of our engineering team as well. And they don't go, oh boy, here comes the Department of No to tell me that I can't do something again. It like gives them a little bit more empowerment and information on what's going on so that they're aware, and security team doesn't come off as the, what I like to call the security ninjas that pop out of the ceiling and go, surprise, you can't do anything now.
Yeah.
Jim, I know we've got a bunch of stuff listed here on the slide. Yeah. Any other things you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to, as you're learning to code, you learn all these different algorithms, right? Like how to do sorting is the classic one, right? Like you do sort of these brute force sorts and you realize that that's way too slow. That'll never work. So you come up with, you learn better algorithms. And I think security, there's some benefits like that too, right? Like, yes, we want to shift left. We want to find issues earlier, but really we also want our developers to become more aware of those issues, and then they don't make the same mistakes twice, right? And then there's even less to do, and this just becomes this you kind of get this flywheel effect, right? So there's loads of other things that people do. We're going to talk about more of these types of things as we go forward here, but to sort of increase that security awareness in general, and not just waiting on a tool to tell you you've done something wrong, but actually doing it better. I also like the line here about accruing tech debt smartly, which I think is an important aspect of it. Again, in the world of development, in the world of applications, even if you're not a developer, I think we all know how apps work. We know that apps still have, every app has some bugs in it. That never becomes a number that's zero for any app that's probably more than 10 lines of code. And security is really the same way. I think it's understood by a lot, but it's not said very often that you're never going to get to zero security vulnerabilities in an app. But you got to figure out the ones that do matter, just like you do with a bug. If it's a showstopper bug, you're going to fix it. If it's a showstopper security issue, you need to fix it. But how do you know which ones are showstopper security issues? That's a trickier proposition. But I like that idea too. Like we have to figure that out, because that's how security and development are going to work together. Like we're not going to get developers to spend a full sprint just doing security bug reviews. It's too much.
Yeah, 100%. Jim and I were talking about this line yesterday, and then we started talking about how engineering teams do unit testing and integration tests. And when you talk to an engineering leader and you go, what's your coverage? What's your test coverage look like? If they say we're doing great, they mean like 80% coverage on unit tests or integration tests, function tests. Integration tests probably a lot lower. But even as an engineering leader thinks about how to do coverage, they're not talking about making sure they get everything. They're talking about making sure they get the important things and the really critical to test things, right? So if we think about that same way as security teams and how to function this application security, scale our application security team by automating a lot of these functions, giving this information to the right people, we make our application security team more effective and give us more time to do nitpicky, like go deep on an application or find that thing. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. Find that one thing that's in the backlog and it's really nitpicky, and we can go work on it some more because now we have time, because most of our things are being taken care of. So there's 3 things that we got to work with when we're talking about shift left or doing any organizational change. Let's talk about the 3-legged stool of successful organization change. TM. That's a trademark. No one can use that now. But when you're talking about organizational change, I think most people know about the 3 pillars of change, and they are people, process, technology. And the people, process, technology, I'm stealing Jim's slide, is super important here. Jim, you do the next slide, okay?
Yeah.
It's super important because you can't just buy technology and you can't just change process and you can't just, maybe you could just do people, but it makes it really hard. So we're going to talk through some of this stuff. Bruce Schneier made this famous, but I think he also borrowed it. But it's really about how to be really effective at changing the way an organization works. So an important thing to remember about this little 3-legged stool is
not linear, right? Like I was thinking through, an analogy on this and trying to think if there's any software, any technology you could buy that would sort of bring the other two along just by magically buying the software. I was thinking through it. Like we use Asana here, which is a process tool, right? It is meant to create process that people will follow. But I can tell you, having used Asana for 4 years now, it doesn't solve the people and process side of things magically just because we bought it. It's a lot of work to get that set up, and that's a tool that's meant to be all about the process. But I think you can think through. You start with any of those three legs of the stool, and you do that one first. You're always going to run into problems if you do it linearly, right? Even if you start with people, which maybe that's a great place to, like, we got to get everybody on board. That seems like a logical place to start. Then let's define the perfect process. And now let's go find a piece of software that matches that perfect process. Well, guess what? There's no software that matches the perfect process. So then you're back to like, okay, we got to redesign all this, which is sort of the point, right? Like you're never going to do all of these things perfectly if you just do them linearly. You're probably never going to do them all perfectly anyway, but they have to happen at the same time. Clearly, if you buy the technology and just expect that the people and process will magically fall into place, that won't work. That's the Asana example, even though it is a process tool. Again, putting process first doesn't necessarily solve that either. So these have to be done together, right? This has to be sort of a round robin thinking and working session to get it to all work together.
So generally what you're saying is nope. It's right. Not like this at all.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. It's got to be all three. And it's got to be all three at roughly the same time too. It's got to be, the considering all three of these things. Yes, the people need to determine and kind of work on the process and then implement the process, and the technology has to line up with the process, and then you figure out where these things don't line up and you come up with a solution for that. But you can't do these things in isolation and expect the next block to just magically fall into place if you're not doing all of these things together.
Yeah, one of the analogies I put in here was about actually building a three-legged stool. Like you can build the stool leg by leg, measure one leg, cut it, turn it, put it in the stool, measure the next leg, cut it, turn it, put it in the stool. You might end up with either a lopsided stool and then you're trimming it down. Then you got a stool that's like this tall, just because now all the legs are even, or, the stool doesn't stand up at all. So when furniture makers or people are building a three-legged stool, like it's a hot market right now, three-legged stools. They usually cut the legs and turn the legs all at the same time, right? So all three pieces, cut those legs and then turn them to a pattern so they come out the same way, which means they're all being worked on at the same time, just like we're talking here. I got a good example of what Jim's talking about. He said Asana, and I want to talk about, Jim, you remember when cloud started to become a thing and people were like, you know what is going to be awesome? This cloud sounds so magical. We'll just rub some cloud on our problems. We'll just move all of our workloads to the cloud exactly how they are, and it will make us so efficient and so much faster at go-to-market. And then about 6 months later, people were like, hey, wait, it didn't do any of that.
Yeah, I do. I was at VMware at the time. So I remember going to the first few reInvent shows when they were, only like 10,000 people. And it was sort of magical at the time. Like all this stuff is really cool and really interesting and really innovative. And not being at VMware, there were also some, oh crap moments that we had from a strategy standpoint. But I think exactly what you said happened, right? Which is, people started doing things and realized like, oh, wait, it's way more expensive. It's way harder than we thought. This app that we had actually doesn't work very well there. And over time, people will learn like, okay, maybe let's figure out what we're doing and why we're doing it first, and then see. To your point, it wasn't magic.
All right, so it's not magic. So we know that there's a bunch of work to do here, right? But ultimately, it can pay off. And where it pays off is being able to scale the AppSec team. So we always talk about this 100 devs to 1 security person ratio that exists kind of out there. I think it's low. I think it's more like 200 to 1. But being able to scale the AppSec team without needing to go find these really hard to find, really good AppSec resources, we're talking about less rework and lower engineering costs, time to market, code. Look at the shirt that I'm wearing. It's so apropos. Code faster, safer. Build safer code faster and get it to market to provide value to customers, because that's what ultimately we're out here doing. Reduce those bugs and vulnerabilities deployed to production. Hard work, but it's work that you can and should do. And we're going to talk through a bunch of the stuff that you got to do. First of all, Jim, talk to us about process.
Yeah. I think, we talk about shifting left, and shifting left sort of is the sort of thing that we're trying to drive in the process, right? Let's get more people involved in security. And then we start to think through, okay, well, like, what is everybody's role in this process? Because it's developers, but obviously security doesn't want to, you're not just handing it off and saying, great, my job's done, developers are going to do it for me. That's clearly not the way that I think anybody really thinks of this. You have platform teams and DevOps teams who are building lots of tools and integrating lots of things. Like, there's loads of people that have to be involved in this, and we'll get to the people side of it in a second. But then starting to think through, well, what does it mean to shift left? Where are we putting security tools? What am I actually testing? I start getting results out of those security tools and knowing what to fix. Like, what do I pay attention to here? I think probably everybody's run through the excitement of installing and doing some security tests and then getting this huge list of issues. You're like, okay, great, I found a lot of stuff. Now what? Like, what do I actually do? Your day job is developer, right? Your day job's not magically going to become review all these security issues and figure out what to do. Your job is still developer. You're going to maybe try and carve out a few minutes to do that. There's a great some research we've done just looking at CVSS, all the vulns sort of in the National Vulnerability Database for the last 5 years. So you're talking about tens of thousands, maybe close to 100,000 vulnerabilities over the last 5 years. And just looking at CVSS scores for those vulnerabilities, if you go through that math, it turns out that about half of the vulns that have been published in the last 5 years or so have a CVSS score that comes up to high or critical. So this whole idea that we're going to use CVSS as the magical number for those types of vulns that are published there as the thing that's going to tell us what to do and focus on is thrown out the door, because there's too many still left at high and critical. If we flip it, there's a different type of score called EPSS. And if you haven't seen it, it's a fun topic to go look up and see. It's an exploit predictability score. You can take those same vulnerabilities, look at their exploit predictability score, and there's less than 2%. There's that have a score, an exploit prediction score above 50%, which means all of those vulnerabilities, whether they're high or critical or low or medium, right? They all get kind of thrown into this bucket of almost no chance of being exploited. So it's a completely different view of those exact same vulnerabilities. But it's this problem of prioritization. Which of these things actually matter to us and which ones don't, and do we have the right data to make that decision or not? And it's probably not enough just to pick one metric, and that's going to be the magic number. It's going to take more than that, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I make fun of, usually when I do this talk, I make fun of the categorization, because it eventually doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You got low, medium, high, and then they were like, well, we need more critical. Well, as Jim said, now 50% of the things are high and critical. What if we have super critical and mega critical and uber critical? It just doesn't help.
Yeah.
What helps is what things should I be taking care of? Not just what generally are they ranked as? And that's one of the things I think we can talk about here later in the last section. But I also want to talk about this process design. So a lot of the times when I see this when we talk to prospects, I did this when I was I still do this a little bit as a practicing security person. I always take that little outlier and I go, does this thing help me with this naggy outlier? But what I forget about is, if I take care of the 2 standard deviations of what my organization normally does, how I really build software, things that we build all the time, things that we commit to in PR and release multiple times per week. If I take care of that as that normal standard deviation, or 2 standard deviations. Now I have time to go work on those outliers. Those we zombie APIs is the new hotness, Jim. Zombie APIs, those things that we know about, but people won't retire because they're still making the company money somehow, right? There's still $150,000 coming through this old API that no one works on anymore and no one takes care of. And the security team's like, dude, we got to kill that thing dead. And the exec team is like, no, we do not. That's $150,000. We don't have to get somewhere else. But if we work on our process around that middle section, we can spend more time testing and understanding and really being able to talk about these outliers on the edges. So really thinking about when you're talking about process and redesigning process, making sure you're covering the normal middle, the bell part of the bell curve here, and not the outer edges back in. The other thing here, Jim, I think you got to remember that you got to go get feedback about this process. So that's the next section we're going to talk about a little bit, but you can't just go, okay, I think this is the perfect process. I will roll it out everywhere without talking to anybody. But you definitely have to get feedback about like, how is this working? So a lot of times when I'm talking to security teams, I go, who's your favorite development team? Who's the absolute favorite development team? They're already doing a lot of security stuff. They're already engaged with the security team. They're already did away with the moniker, the team of no. And they're my buddies. I'm going to go start with that team and go, hey, we got some new tooling that we want to roll into some new process. Will you help design and work out the bugs with us? Usually they're pretty cool about it. And then figure out what works there with the feedback and then go redesign and re-implement some more further. Jim, any more things to say on getting feedback?
No, I think it's a good point. I had a conversation with an analyst, and they said it a slightly different way that sort of rung true. It's sort of along the same lines, but this idea that between security, AppSec, and developers, they want to collaborate, and interestingly, they tend to have veto power over each other, and sometimes in obvious and explicit ways, and sometimes in less obvious and explicit ways. Like if you go buy a tool, an AppSec tool, and just hope that your developers will use it, they can either outright veto it, or they will veto it in another way by just ignoring it and not doing what you want. Flip side, developers want lots of tools and things too, and security has in a lot of cases has the ability to say, no, we're not using that because it opens up too many problems for us. But then you got to work together on this, or again, you're not going to come up with a good process. You're probably not going to come up with good tools either. But 100%.
Cool. All right, so this sounds awesome so far. Hopefully everyone watching and joining us is like, yeah, this sounds great. I'm going to go redesign a whole bunch of process. But think about the amount of teams that we've talked about so far that we're affecting. We're talking about automation and first line remediation and ultimately what we should fix. So you're talking about DevOps teams, cloud architects, engineers, developers, whatever you call them, and the security team. But as a security team member or as a DevOps member or an engineer, how many of those other teams are you in charge of? And how many of those other teams can you direct work for? So if you're thinking, I'm going to roll out this new process and the engineers are going to do all of the work, and you haven't talked about that, it's not going to be super successful probably. So let's talk about the part where it gets a little hard.
Yeah, talking to people, right? This is always I love designing things and coming up with things, and I always have brilliant ideas, and then I have to take it and show it to people, and it's like, oh no, there's problems, right? Like, oh, they found the flaws, and now I have to go do more work. But it's important, right? This is the critical part of it, which is, I can design the process that makes the most sense in my head, and the technology and solutions that will help us with this process in my head, or even in my team's head, and in our plans, may be perfect on paper until everybody else starts looking at it, and then they start poking holes in it. But that's a good part of it, right? That's what makes the whole thing better. Is we're not designing this, certainly not designing it just for me. So if we want other people involved in this, and in particular, when we're talking about AppSec, we have all these other teams that have to be involved. If we're going to do DevSec and Ops, then we need a process and feedback and input from dev, sec, and ops to be involved in this. Otherwise, we're not going to make it very far in our program and in our goals overall.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I always like to say, I always like to say computers are easy. They do exactly what you do, what you tell them to do, exactly how you told them to do it, whether that's right or wrong. They do exactly what you told them. And people are the absolute opposite. And that's what makes them hard. They interpret and they hear and they do and they execute completely different than the words that have come out of your mouth or the words that you've written down on paper. So you actually have to go, talk to them, walk through what we're talking about in this process. How is it going to affect you? How is it going to make you more efficient? Even though initially it sounds like, shit, I'm going to end up doing more work here. That doesn't sound awesome to me. Okay, let me help you further down the road as to how this is going to help you and us. And the thing that I think is really interesting is this is the leg of the stool that's the most costly if you don't do it. Like if you don't talk to people and you don't get people bought into process change using new technology, like it just is shelfware. Like if you don't do this, you are basically buying shelfware.
Yep. Yeah, I think that the big key there, right, to any kind of organizational change is buy-in, right? You can. There's only so much you can do by forcing people to sort of follow your process or dictating what they have to do all the time. That works in certain circumstances, but for something like this, it doesn't work very well. Like you have to have that buy-in and agreement on it. And the only way to do that is to get together and collaborate on it, right? To make sure everybody has their inputs on it and sort of craft it that way.
Jim, that reminds me of a guy I know. Frank the Tank.
Guy named Frank. Yeah, I imagine there's a few people here who don't know who Frank the Tank is, and some of those people probably don't know who Frank the Tank is because they're too young to remember this movie, which makes me very sad and very old. But if you haven't seen it, he decides it's old school, right? And he decides Frank the Tank decides we're going streaking. He runs into a room. He's naked as the day he was born. Says we're going streaking, and off he goes, and nobody follows him. He's just running around through a college campus by himself, streaking. He had no buy-in on this.
Zero buy-in.
Yeah, exactly. So
he didn't do any work recruiting anyone at the party. He just was like, strip, microphone, we're going streaking, and then he ends up running through the street all by himself.
Yeah.
Embarrassingly. So same thing with application security and shift left. You can't just like go run hard at it all by yourself. You got to work on it a little bit with some of the other members of your team, some of the other people that are responsible, which brings me to how do we set clear role definitions for shift left? So a lot of people may know about RACI, and RACI is a really good thing, except for it doesn't have a person who makes decisions or a group who makes decisions. It's just a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm responsible, I'm accountable, and I have input, and I don't like any of this. Now we're at a stalemate because RACI didn't help us figure out what to do, or no one is the decider. So that's why I like the RAPID framework, because someone is a decider here. So if we talk about the RAPID framework, we're talking about recommenders. Obviously, that's probably the security department, right? Who's recommending security technology to do security shift left? Security department is probably a pretty good input there. Who's got to agree? Probably security and development. You can't just buy a tool that security is like, this is great, and developers is like, no, it's not. It's terrible. So those two groups probably have to agree. Obviously, shift left, the perform part of our RAPID matrix here, is development mostly. There's a little bit of oversight, the trust and verify part for security, but most of the perform is development. So there's yet another reason why we got to get developers involved. Who's got input on how this all works? Well, we've already talked about security. We've already talked about development. That DevOps team probably needs to get involved too. How's this going to work in CI/CD? How's this going to work on how we build and deploy applications? All that good stuff. I left one open here. I'm leaving it open. Who do you think should be the decider? Put it in chat. Just dump into chat what group you think, or what person you think should be the decider on shifting left. I'll give you like 30 seconds. Just dump something into chat who you think it is. It can't be Frank the Tank because we already made mention that he's not the right guy. It could be Jim. It's probably not Jim in your organization. It could be Cody. Cody's pretty busy, so I don't think he's the decider. Everyone in the chat.
Could be Chat GPT.
Ooh, it could be Chat. No,
taking over everything.
Don't make Chat GPT decide anything. No one has an answer who they think should be the decider. All right, fine. You know what? I'm just going to call it then. How about development leadership, Jim?
That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Somebody did say CISO, I think.
Oh, I missed it. There we go.
Yeah, just came in. Which is, I think good probably from a organizational standpoint. I think who is the decider on who handles what when we shift left? I think probably a couple clicks down though from the CISO, right? So I think that's where development leadership really sort of comes in. Like developers have to do the performance part of this. The development leaders are probably the ones that are going to say, like, do I want my developers spending there? How much time am I going to let my developers spend on this versus all the other stuff that my developers also need to do and get sort of measured on, like productivity and release cadences and things like that, right? So I think both of those definitely are key people involved in this process, though, overall.
Yeah, and I love that Vern said CISO here, because probably CISO has got the budget. They're going to approve spending the budget, but I guarantee you, in this paradigm shift, I said bad words. If the CISO is not talking to VP of development or the CIO or the CTO, they're going to struggle a little bit too, right? They should be working together with those people to go, hey, we're about to do this and I'm about to spend the money. Are you on board with what we did? And if the other end of that goes, on board with what? That's a problem. Like that spend is going to get paused real quick. So being able to go, hey, we did all this testing. Your group was involved. Everyone seemed to like it. Hopefully you got good feedback. If you don't, please tell me now, because I like feedback about process from your people. Hey, are you on board? And they go, yep, we're on board. We can figure it out from here. The technology and the change gets going. That technology purchase to enable the change gets going. All right. So I'm feeling a little more confident. Now I've got some process and I've got some people involved. And now we know we need these teams involved. And we know why that dev leadership needs to be involved, because obviously they're the ones that can direct the resources that we can't as security teams. And now we get to talk about the fun part. Welcome to why we're here. I mean, vendors talking about technology. Hey-o. But no, really, we really like the people process part too. Jim.
Yeah. I think, getting the technology there, I think is critical. I think understanding, who's going to be using the technology, who's it really for, right? I think as we talk about the people and process side, like who is going to be interacting with these tools, and certainly in some cases it's multiple people, but like you got things that you want developers to do, and therefore you've got tools that you want developers probably to be interacting with at some level, right? They need to produce something that a developer can do something with and understands. So that's a huge part of that. And our tools specifically are designed directly around that, and helping developers understand what the issues are and how to fix them and where to fix them, and work really nicely together to deliver that information to them, but also showing it to the security team. Like again, it's great we get in front of the developers, but security needs to understand like what's been found and how are we doing it to actually fixing those things. So you see the new poll question here. For those of you who have SAST and DAST tools, which hopefully is most of you, whether you like them or not, maybe a different question, but hopefully you have something in place for SAST and DAST. How easy and how fast do those tools that you have today make it for your developers to fix vulnerabilities? Kind of going back to our original thought early on too, the challenge here is fixing vulnerabilities. Certainly there's, when we talk about fast, there's some classical examples of both SAST and DAST tools that aren't fast at fixing and even finding the issues, but let's assume we've got the issues listed out somehow. But how easy those tools make it to actually get things fixed and corrected overall.
Yeah, I think, Jim, your point about kind of the primary persona that these two tools serve and why they go so well together is really focused on helping a dev get from, I don't know about a problem. Oh, now I do. How do I fix it? Okay, cool. Now I've fixed it and I'm back on my regular job of getting software out the door, fixing bugs, getting value created for customers, all that good stuff. So we got a good mix on our poll here. We got a couple of people said that's really easy. Those must be current customers. Ayo, I'm just kidding. Somewhat easy, not easy at all is kind of the big leader here. And shortly behind that is, I'm not sure. That's I would bucket that in with not easy at all, but that's just me. So we got kind of like the bottom end of our poll here is really shaken out as our original problem. What's the easier or the harder part? And the hard part here is doing fixing, which is the most important part of AppSec.
Yep.
So let's talk about some of the table stakes here. When you're thinking about shift left and how developers are going to interact with something, talk about some of the things you got to be thinking about, Jim. What I know we've got some of the things listed here.
Yep.
Talk about what you've run into with customers and prospects and things people should be thinking about.
Yeah. One of our listeners popped in a comment here too, the noise direction, right? I think as we shift left, we talk about finding things and, we want to find a good, number of things. We will hopefully find all the things, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to fix all the things, as we talked about earlier too. So how do we cut through that noise to get to the things that we're going to actually spend some time fixing? We being really the developers, probably not, it's definitely not me because I'm not either one of those things, but how are we going to get our developers to focus on those things? And I think, our combination of Snyk and StackHawk is designed to cut through a lot of that noise. We both find things where both of the tools are saying, you've got a problem here. In the different types of analysis that we're doing is a very good signal that you've got an actual real problem that you need to probably spend some time fixing. And also then where, like how, okay, great, I've got a problem. Where is that problem? How do I get to it? And with these types of issues, the code issues, it's not always a simple, like if it's a package issue, you just replace the package. You put a new version of the package in, you'll figure it out, right? Even if it's a transitive dependency, you can sort of suss those things out. But when it's a code issue, not always super clear. Like you have to trace back through the code stack, like where did this thing come from and how do I get to the resolution? So if you have to do all that manually, you're wasting time, right? You're never going to fix all that many issues. And you're going to be wasting cycles on things that you really probably don't want to spend a lot of time on. So getting to that source, right, and understanding how to make that problem go away is a critical part of this as well. And again, things that both of us work on together to help developers actually get to that point of fix and knowing what the fix is there.
Yeah, it's a super good point. And in the chat there, Lisa is saying that SaaS and DAST tools generate a lot of noise. And here's what is awesome about how Snyk and StackHawk work together is there are things that you might not want to fix, but there are definitely things that we both find at the same time. So not only where do I find this thing in the running code from DAST side, but also where does that exist in code itself so that I can go fix that code and retest in the running app to make sure that the problem is actually gone. And that is where that prioritization is really, really super awesome when we're talking about how our SaaS and DaaS work together. Joss said SaaS is really fast, DaaS is a challenge. I challenge you to check out our DaaS because it's super fast. But I think the other thing that you got to remember here, like talk about authentication, talk about covering APIs, talk about covering different code languages, and automation of those common attacks and attack vectors. But also think about how it's going to enable you as a security person to do your trust and verify job. And I say and, not but, because but implies you didn't do the first part. Trust and verify that what's going on is right. Being able to, what's super awesome about this is you can, when you let engineers make decisions and document those decisions, you can see who's introducing problems, the decisions they're making around it, and start teaching those specific people about problems that they're introducing or handling the wrong way, or a variety of other things, / by training for them in the problems that they're introducing, which would be awesome in my world of buying really generic training for engineering that doesn't apply to anything that they do. So I think that's kind of table stakes for shift left. If you're thinking about application security, what you should be thinking about, obviously automation, speed is another good one. How does it test? What does it test? How do we prioritize those findings so that developers are working on the right things at the right time? And then obviously our correlation there, I think, is really good. And lastly, that trust and verify bridge building stuff. So here's the dichotomy about technology. I skipped the slide. Unfortunately, you have to understand the technology that's out there to design the process. And it pains me as a technology vendor to say this, but maybe you shouldn't get the technology without designing and testing the process with the people. Yep. I know you've seen this. I've seen it where people go, yep, I'm buying technology, and then they really struggle to roll it out. And I've also seen it the other way where they get engineering teams involved in proof of values or tests or demos or whatever that is, and they are so much more successful when they hit the ground running. I know you guys have seen it too, Jim.
Yeah, in fact, we encourage it, right? I mean, we want all these teams involved, and it's not just, because we like having a bunch of people involved in the process. It's because it's going to be more successful if they're bought in early, right? And we know everybody's requirements early, and we can work with that. It becomes a problem when we don't have everybody's buy-in, and then we trying to roll things out, and then then we hit those inevitable obstacles, right, that we talked about before, and everybody's sort of rankled by the process, and then people dig in their heels, and they do that sort of hidden veto where they just decide they're not going to do it because they don't want to, and it wasn't their idea, and they don't know why it was your idea. So it's I think an absolute must that everybody is involved in this early on.
While we were talking about that, I put up the poll. How often are you releasing software? If you haven't answered, jump over to the polls and answer. We've got a lot of every 2 weeks, and I'm not sure. For those of you who are not sure, I would encourage you to go find a development team and just kind of sit in on their stand-ups or their scrums or whatever they're doing and listen to the problems that they're solving and how quickly they're trying to solve them. Get a real gauge for the scale and the speed at which they're trying to deliver software. It doesn't take long. Just go in there, be friendly, be like, hey, I just want to hang out and listen. I'm not going to tell you no the entire time I'm here or after I leave. I'm not a narc. Just go hang out with them and let them know what's up. Hey, we're almost to the end here. If you've got questions, dump them in the chat, dump them in the Q&A. Let's hit our recap here a little bit. And then we'll show you a quick little demo, and then we'll let everybody get back to the middle of their day. So let's talk about recap. I think some of the important things here, AppSec is a business problem. It's not a security only problem. So we got to treat it like one. We got to treat it like a thing that is helpful for our business to deliver value to our customers safely and at speed. In shift left security testing, there's no magic. There's nothing. You can't buy a silver bullet. You can't buy a piece of technology that automatically makes everything go away. You have to design and include people to do that. And remember, no streaking, at least not alone. Like get 4 or 5 people to go streaking with you. Then that's probably a good thing. People will be like, hey, I'm getting left out of the streaking. They'll join you. That just got a little weird. I should rephrase. What else?
Yeah, I think, making sure you've got this all documented, I think to the sort of the sort of point of us being here together too, right? Oftentimes it's going to take more than one tool, right? There's loads of ways to sort of check an application, loads of things to check in an application, and it's going to take more than one tool. And that needs to be part of this decision-making process too. One of the great things that, we like, is it biased as we are about our companies, what we like about the fact that we work together very well, right? And we cover the same application, different sort of view on that application, a different way of testing it, but it lines up very nicely to produce, to help cut through that noise that we talked about, and to produce results for the people that need to do the fixing, which is the developers. And so those need to be part of that process as well. I think, breaking down the silos is clear. Like, again, it's just like when DevOps was all the rage, like it was about breaking down the silos. Now DevSecOps, when we talk about AppSec, is, one of the big things. And that's all about breaking down those silos, creating this process where where everybody understands their role and how they do this. And it's all driving towards the same goal. Overall, becoming part of everybody's day job, right? It's part of my job now. It's just something I do as I do my development, as I create the platforms that developers use, as I handle security. We're all aligned on that.
Yeah, awesome. And the last part here, part of the normal dev workflow. If you don't know how devs work today, it's hard to design something that works into their workflow. So again, go talk to devs. Figure out how to get security testing tools into their workflow. Hey, speaking of which, I've got a really good example of what that might look like if we want to look at that. So I've actually got a little demo repo up here. People can play with it if they want. It's out on my public GitHub, but it integrates Snyk testing and StackHawk testing. And I'm going to show you what we mean by give people information that they need in the flow that they're in. So here's what a pull request looks like in GitHub with GitHub Actions, where we're making some changes to this code. I made a lot of changes, and I'm terrible at writing. So there's the config updates and all kinds of stuff, and I made a comment. But we also have our HawkScan dynamic application security testing done, and we failed this PR because of a threshold finding. But right here in the comment, how many things do I need to be worried about, right? So how many highs, mediums, lows do I have right in the comment? And then further down the road, we've got a Snyk code that's failing a test. We could make that pass if we wanted to, but you also see it below the HawkScan test. The Snyk licenses check did not fail, and the Snyk security check, which is the open source version of this, also did not fail because the manifest didn't change. I've also got this integrated into Snyk code. So if we go look at this particular guy here, we can see we've got some SQL injection, and here's our buddy Patch over here. That didn't make big enough for anyone to see. Here's our buddy Patch on our SQL injection, and you can see we've got Snyk code evidence that ties in with this running API test. So that's what we're talking about when we say give people the information they need at the time they need it, so that they can take action. They can figure out where this lives, where this problem is. They can fix it. They can retest it. And by the way, when they merge code, it's going to end up doing this again, but they can also test it on their local machine before they do that to go, yeah, I got this fixed. I got Snyk code says it's good. StackHawk says it's good. I'm going to push that into CI/CD. My checks are going to pass, and I can get this this PR merged. I think that's all we got for everybody. Let's see. This questions. And also, I know we're running up on time, so thank you. If you want to check out Snyk and or StackHawk, snyk.io and stackhawk.com both have, check out a free trial and test out the software, and or contact some of our sales teams if you want to talk to us more about it, or our technical teams. I want to say thanks to Cody, and I want to say thanks to Jim for joining us, Cody for kicking us off, Jim for going with me on this little journey. I super appreciate your time and your input here. It's been really fun. And I also want to thank And Jim can thank too all the people that joined us. So hopefully you learned a bunch of stuff today, or if you learned one thing, that's great. If you have questions, please dump them into the chat. Jim?
Yeah, just echo that. Thanks everybody for joining today. I certainly would love to get a T-shirt like the one you've got on, Scott. So I'll hit you up on Twitter and see what we can do there, and encourage everybody else to bug you on Twitter as well and see if they can finagle a T-shirt out of you, or come visit us at a booth at your favorite trade show.
Come visit us at reInvent. That'd be the next one.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Well, Scott and Jim, thank you both so much for joining us today. Any questions we do happen to receive in the next minute or so, we will make sure to forward over to you guys so that you can follow up with those afterwards. But I do want to thank you both for joining us today on Techstrong Learning, providing the demos, the slides, and everything. So once again, thank you both.
Thanks, Cody.
Thanks, everyone.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to also remind our audience we've been recording our session today. The recording will be emailed to you as soon as it's available, but you can also find it on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. The two winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Robin G and Ray B. So sorry to our two speakers, you did not win today. But I would like to thank our speakers for joining us today. I'd like to thank StackHawk for sponsoring our program. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here. If you stick around for just one more minute, you will be pushed into a survey that only takes about a minute to fill out. It's also attached to the handout section. So please let us know your thoughts there. And we hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, guys.